Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's see, can you all hear me? Thank you. It's a privilege to be here in a place that I admire with people that I like a lot. And I've been thinking about, as I came over, what's a simple message? And a simple message is that there is an opportunity to really turn things around and change things in a fundamental way. It comes at some level because of the opportunity that we have around big data, the interconnectedness of networks, the extraordinary success of mobile phones, and the businesses and applications and services that can be built, whether they are micro multinationals or whether they are huge new companies that will create wealth here, create new jobs opportunities, and new multinationals, new corporations, and new public policy that will make all that happen. After all, ultimately jobs are primarily created in the private sector by fast-growing new entrants who come up with new ideas to solve new problems that matter. So what I want to talk about is sort of smart problems and get your comments about this as well. And today, I think, as everybody knows, Europe is facing some very significant, a continent that I love tremendously. I've spent much of my life, I spent quite a bit of my childhood in Italy, for example. So I understand Europe as well as any American can. And Europe is going through a tough patch, limited to no growth over the next year, a very significant problem with energy prices, the issues that you have from a political structure perspective, and of course the debt crisis, which seems to be impossibly complicated to get through. So I think that what you're doing here by having an innovation convention is very, very important, because the way we will get through these problems is through innovation. That's the important thing. It's not going to be because we rearrange the chairs of all of the established organizations. That new things happen from new thinking, new organizations, new companies, new projects, real invention, real science, real new solutions. And to me, the questions that are being debated are quite fundamental. How do we ensure a good life for all of Europe's citizens, especially as the population ages? How do we create sustainable societies, ones which don't consume all of the world's resources? This is obviously not just a European problem. And how do we organize the systems in our communities so that they produce more than benefits just for the elite? How do we make sure that it benefits everyone in society? Because that produces a healthier and stronger society for all of us, including the people at the very top. But to me, you have to ask the smart question and the smart problem. And a smart question answers the question why. Like, why should we deal with this? Because it inspires and galvanizes actions from the many. It solves a universal problem, a large-scale problem, not a little micro problem. And a smart problem is something that everyone can engage in solving. And I want to talk about how, instead of talking about all the tactical problems, we talk about smart problems. So in my case, you define the problem, and that serves as the root of innovation. That serves as the way you think about it. What problem are we solving? Because these smarter solutions are also more nuanced. I wish it were as simple as in the American Western movies. Good guy, bad guy, boom, boom, boom. Right? I wish that politics were so simple. I wish that the problems that we face were so simple. But in fact, they're not. That as we've all gotten interconnected, everyone has an agenda, we all hear from now, these require nuanced solutions that get through all the necessary problems that people create and the sensitivities and produce real prosperity. It's also about understanding that every decision you make now is no longer a local decision. People used to say, well, we don't like that, we'll just ban it in our country. But now in Europe, because of free labor, problems can come from other countries. In America, we'd say, well, we just outlaw that bad thing we don't like. But other countries don't have to follow our laws. We used to think that we were the center of the world. Of course we were. Well, maybe not, but we thought so. It's now a multipolar world, and every decision has to be thought of in a global context. And the laws differ. The cultural mores differ. And the ways in which societies will focus these problems are different. And it's also about long-term adaptation to the change that's occurring. The biggest change that's occurring is the connectedness of all of us. And no one talks about this. When was it that we got to the point where you had to check your email at night before you went to bed and in the morning before you have breakfast. For me, it was about 10 years ago. For most people, it's in the last 5 years. For young people, it's been their entire lives. I remember when I used to come here and I didn't have connectivity. You could actually enjoy the beauty of Europe. Now I'm online all the time, back at home. This is reality. This changes everything for all of us. And it means the societies will change as people are interconnected in ways that we can only imagine. I have come to the view that, in fact, there are two separate worlds. There's this physical world that we all understand, all of you are part of as our political leaders and as our business leaders. But there's another world, and that world of cyberspace has slightly different rules than the rules we all have. And that those slightly different rules are to some degree in conflict. But as those worlds merge, each keeps the other in check. That the cyberspace world that I've spent so much time of my life in will keep governments honest and keep the physical world honest. But the physical world, the governments and so forth, will also keep the crazy people in the internet honest too. Each gets better as the two overlap. I was thinking about technology as it evolves, and there's a quote from somebody who's a hero of mine, a computer scientist. His name is Edgar Dijkstra. This is considered harmful for the technical people in the world, in the room. And he said, the question of whether machines can think is about as relevant as whether submarines can swim. That ultimately the world will evolve into what people do, which is emotion, intuition, live a good life, build great societies, and what computers do, which is they know and remember everything. They have perfect memories, and trust me, none of us do. And that the two coexist in a really nice way, that one helps the other. So today we have this enormous explosion of data. It's called the big data problem in computer science. Every second there's 2,000 tweets are posted. Twitter, very successful. Every minute, 48 hours of YouTube. Every minute, 48 hours of YouTube that you don't have time to watch is being posted. And that number continues to grow. And in every 48-hour period in 2010, more data was created by all of humanity than in the past 30,000 years. That's how much new data. Most of it, by the way, is user-generated content. And so in our case, we have an opportunity using Google, using the kind of tools, using the kind of values that I'm talking about to solve some smart problems. If we can perfect search, if we can make search much better than it is today, we can solve a really smart problem. What we're trying to do is use the power of data to sort of turn noise, all of this enormous explosion of data, into knowledge, and then eventually knowledge into real wisdom. Now that's a long project. It will take longer than my lifetime for sure. But over the last year we ran 20,000 experiments on search, and we made 500 improvements in search just to get to better answers. So from my perspective, the reason I'm at Google, the reason I work on this is because I believe that this is a scale platform for helping you think about smart problems. I was thinking about some other examples, and the one that is notable is the explosion of smartphones. In every case, in every internal meeting, in every set of numbers we do internally, the growth of smartphones and mobile adoption exceeds the forecast we do every time. Whether it's revenue, whether it's in unit volume, whether it's in applications. And by smartphones, I mean primarily the iPhone and the Android platform. And the reason is that they have powerful browsers, and those powerful browsers can connect to what is known as cloud computing, where everything is stored on the servers. It's the new computing architecture. But there are other examples of smartphones that are particularly interesting. In Afghanistan, election monitors, Afghanistan, right, where America is trying to get out of one of its more recent wars, use smartphone cameras to record polling results in the 2010 election. And the claim is that it reduced electoral fraud by 60%. It's amazing that when you actually photograph people committing crimes, they do fewer. What a shock. Who knew, right? Another example where the cyber world can have a positive effect on governance in the physical world. In Uganda, one of the important industries they have involves cassava plants. And using mobile apps, they can identify diseases. They can literally take pictures, they can spread the information, and they can harness the power of their communities to address the spread of diseases which could materially affect the economics of that country. In the space station right now, 2 robots are flying around powered by Android handsets, by the way, sending data and images to ground controllers. Right? Another example of this explosion. And I was thinking here in Europe, what's interesting, there's a European Union project called the Mont Blanc project, not the real mountain, but it's the name of the project, that is building a supercomputer system that, among other things, is going to use 15 to 30% less power than other architectures. See? These guys are thinking right. It's not just performance, it's also performance times power. It's important that we respect the resources that we have. And when they're building a prototype systems of 50 petaflops, which is a very large number of floating point performance for those of you who don't follow these things, and ultimately move to what is known as exascale performance. It's an example of this kind of leadership that's possible. And of course it'll be used in medicine and science and stuff that I don't understand. But I'm proud to see that a platform that we talk about can be used to solve the problems that affect all of us. It's interesting that in CERN, again, another example of European leadership. The U.S., of course, abandoned this with the project in the 1990s, which we canceled in Texas after spending $10 billion digging a half hole underneath the ocean, underneath the Texas Panhandle. Recently announced that they may have accelerated subatomic particles faster than the speed of light. If so, then we've got a real problem in physics, and a real problem is real opportunity. Doing this on the Franco-Swiss border is particularly exciting because it shows that every society has an opportunity to make a fundamental leap, whether it's in science or entrepreneurship or in networking. The difference now, if you go back to the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, is the amount of collaboration. The number of scientists globally, the amount of data that they spend doing together. It's impossible to have imagined this even 10 years ago, let alone today, what they're able to do. So what we did, in many ways with technology, if you go back and look at Industrial Revolution, which you all invented, thank you very much, we pushed the horizons of solvable problems back, right? It's all about pushing the sort of the visible horizon, the event horizon as it's known in space physics. It's pushing it farther, giving us more time, giving us more runway, whatever metaphor you like. We've traveled sort of faster and better than before. We've stretched cables beneath the oceans. And by the way, one of the greatest things we've ever done, and it goes back to the 1850s when we started putting cables between Britain and Newfoundland, is putting fiber optic cables in the ground and under the oceans to connect us. The gift that is, the gift that many of you helped make happen, will help subsequent generations in ways that are inconceivable because of the power of that connectivity. It's truly fantastic. So from my perspective, these are the actions, these are examples of innovation. I was thinking of another example. My friends and heroes, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, in 1974 invented the TCP/IP protocols. And they did this because it was interesting. They were trying to solve the problem of interconnected networks. It did not occur to them that they were inventing perhaps the most important invention in humanity since electricity. The interconnectedness of knowledge, the interconnectedness of people. A protocol, in this particular case, a transmission protocol and an internet naming architecture that would enable the kinds of things that we're talking to today, which are just simply fantastic. And what's interesting is they didn't start by saying, we want to build the internet and become famous. I know them really quite well. They said, all we're trying to do is interconnect things, and something interesting will happen. That's the lesson to be learned here. If you interconnect these markets, if you interconnect the entrepreneurs, if you can interconnect the information, the people will take advantage of the opportunity. You don't have to tell them to be smart. You don't have to tell them to build businesses. They'll do it anyway. What you have to do is you have to get the interconnectivity right. That if you keep them as islands, you lose efficiency, whether it's ideas or science or discovery or whatever. And by the way, sometimes you get discovery by just inventing it. You know, you don't necessarily have to ask your customer. Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. But he wanted to build cars instead because he couldn't manufacture horses. And he wanted to do them on an assembly line, which of course ultimately changed volume manufacturing in automobiles. And so he saw a boundary of solved problems. He solved a place he wanted to go, and he was willing, by just sheer force and might and energy, to go make something which again changed the world. This is the story of innovation. So bringing this back to Europe, which is of course where we are, you have in fact half of the solution already, because European integration is consistent with what I'm talking about. People who would take Europe and put it apart are missing the axis of history. The axis of history is in fact the interconnectedness of things. I was studying this a little bit. Jean Monnet, who created the European coal and steel community, saw economic integration as a way of laying the foundation for peace. So his quote was, "To create Europe is to create peace." Right? That this vision was correct. And so by doing that, you pushed the event horizon out. You created yourself some opportunity for greater peace and prosperity. And today, we now have competitive models. We have the European experiment, which I think will do well. We have the US experiment, which I understand well and has its problems. And then we have these Asian models. And the Asian models are doing very well too. And it's always a shock, at least to Americans, to discover that other models work better than ours. Wow. Maybe the Europeans says, oh yeah, we understand. But Americans are like, oh, how do they do that? They're Asians. It's a typical nasty comment. The fact of the matter is that Americans are wrong on this, and that the Asian models are producing greater growth, greater opportunity, right, and need to be studied, learned from, and taken advantage of. The fact of the matter is they're growing significantly faster. They have a demographic benefit, which is quite clear. That's a benefit that Europe went through in the 40s and 50s, that America went through in the 50s and 60s. And so understanding how they take advantage of the demographic benefit and the connectivity, which they're pursuing at a huge rate, is central to our understanding of what the right policies should be. So from my perspective, when I look at all of this, I say, what do we need to do? But I think you do start with some advantages. You have the benefit of history. You have more than 1,000 years of history. I've been enjoying studying it and watching DVDs of your very colorful and rather dangerous history. And you have all sorts of social and economic benefits by virtue of the integration that you have done. But I think you need to insist from your leaders something. You need to insist that your leaders start operating from fact, from data, not from some political view or some traditional view. They have to be good editors. They have to define the big problems that are worth solving and focus on them. And by the way, I say exactly the same thing to the US politicians, who I would argue are worse, right? We'll see, right? We'll see. It's a race to the bottom. Let's have a race to the top, right? And it's very easy. We want to change the way that leaders make decisions in government and society. Let's start by embracing data-driven decision-making. Did you know that if you want to design a public policy for your citizens, they're all using phones? You can ask them. I remember sitting in a meeting in Washington, and someone had produced a wonderful report, and I said, who read it? And she said, I don't know. Then why did you make it? No, you don't know anybody who wrote it? No, but she was very happy she'd produced it. It's the wrong incentive. Government should be about outcomes, not about process. And the tool you now have is you can measure whether something happened. And if something didn't happen, maybe you should take all that money and give it to something where something else happens. And at least in the European system, this might occur. In the American system, of course, is caught up in lobbying and campaign contributions. We'll see what happens there. But I have a mantra that I use, and I'd like you all to repeat after me. It starts with, in God we trust. So, in God we trust. Thank you. But all others have to bring data. Okay. It's easy. It's easy to understand, right? Let's have a fact-based conversation. I was looking for examples in Europe that are positive examples of that. There's plenty of negative ones, which you already know. Germany's Federal Labor Agency is interesting. What they did is they built a set of software tools that were capable of producing data on all of the programs around labor, and they actually changed their programs based on the data of what worked. Shocking! Maybe everybody else could do something like that. They saved, by their own claim, $10 billion euros, which it's probably a pretty big number even here in Europe. Certainly a big number in my world. And so I think that the EU rules that require governments to make available public sector information are so very important. We call this transparency argument. You should write rules that make the EU data available to your citizens. Transparency. And by the way, they'll help you. Publish the information, and all these Europeans who have nothing else to do because they don't have hobbies or whatever, they can study you. They can make new suggestions. They have lots of time to help you. So don't think of regulating them. Think of bringing them into the tent. Bring them, tell them your problem, and let them use their computers, their time, to come up with new and novel solutions to whether it's parking or labor laws or how to spend money or how to govern better or so forth. It's interesting that governments are the largest collectors of data, not Google. They have an enormous amount of data, plus you have so many governments here, right? Think about it. 27 plus or minus. I think the other aspect of leadership, I talk about data, has to do with getting the goal right. And you know, today the IT sector, the world I'm in, is about 3.4% of GDP, but it's really more than that. Because in our case, it's GDP in general understates knowledge contribution to society. It ignores consumer surplus, those sorts of things. But the internet has ultimately become the growth vector for businesses. If you have a small business, the internet is how you grow your business. If you have a large business, the internet is how you reach your customers and grow your business. It's also had a huge cultural and economic impact. There's no GDP figure for human happiness. So what I know is that you should overinvest in technology, connectedness, networking, and getting rid of the barriers that exist that will enable you to do this. So what does this mean for you all? And I speak to policymakers, and I'll finish up and take your questions and comments. When I look at it, and I listen and I meet with leaders here, they want to create jobs, they want greater tax revenue, they have debt problems, all those other things. Why don't you sit down and figure out what's in the way of creating new private sector businesses in your country and get rid of those obstacles one by one? Why is there a delay here? Why can't I create a company in a day? Why can't I get registered on the internet in a day? Why can't I start doing business on the internet in a day? What's in my way? Often these are very simple tactical problems, which we can all agree on just need to be fixed. It's interesting. Those are simple, but I think important tactics. The strategy should be, and something which I know that this audience agrees with, is a greater focus on education. At Google, we're focusing a lot on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. The evidence is that in these Western societies, we're producing on a per capita basis fewer scientists, fewer engineers than our Asian counterparts. They're getting the benefit of that work. Furthermore, at least in America, we have some brilliant policies where we bring these Asian folks to America, we train them, make them very, very good, and then we won't give them visas and we ship them back to their countries. A brilliant strategy for the other country. I hope in Europe, when you bring in people and you educate them, you keep them here so that they can create excellent businesses, new opportunities, solve and new problems. And we also need to invest in arts and humanities for the same reason. This is a world where the kind of knowledge that I'm talking about really does require college-level thinking, the subtlety, the gradations of thought, the kind of critical thinking that you see in advanced education. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, because you're not going to win in a global economy by training generations of hard laborers, as important as those people are. You're going to win because you conquer the networked opportunities of the globe before you. You're halfway through the integration onto these networks. Don't stop. You can't stop. It would be a terrible tragedy for the Europe that I love and that you all live in. You need to do some other things. I have a list, sorry. You need to make sure that your EU data protection laws, which are pretty good, I think, get better, not worse. You need to make sure that your laws are respecting the rights of people, right? And be very, very focused on what people want, and they want to be online, they want to get everything now, and they want it just to work. And the laws that you make should be technology neutral and very practical to implement, not a patchwork. And I understand this is a mess, but the fact of the matter is that the companies that are going to scale will operate against uniform laws, not a patchwork of laws that vary from one to the other, unless there's some really, really good reason. There's a huge, huge investment in data centers and in cloud computing, but it's harder because of a patchwork of laws to make sure you're doing the right thing. There's estimates, and a number of people have figured out that the U.S. investment in cloud computing has been growing by 41%, whereas it's lagging in Europe. The current estimate is about 27%, where the rules of what you can do and how you can do it are still a little hazy, and they vary by country. This is true for copyrights. It's true for a number of other aspects. We need to have a balance between creators and owners and users of patents. Patents were designed to protect knowledge and reward innovation and to facilitate the sharing of knowledge, not to block things. It's very important that patents not be used to stop things, but rather to enhance choice in many, many ways. This is a big regulatory issue here in the United States, here in Europe, and also in the United States. And what happens is that with overly broad patents or these big patent fights, the winners are the lawyers. And as much as I like lawyers, I'd rather be hiring engineers who will build businesses, build new products, and create competitive choices for consumers in the marketplace, and let the consumer decide. In our case, in the U.S., we have these things called patent trolls, which are companies which are literally large corporations whose solely job is to sort of negotiate around patents. And I think it's largely an unfortunate development. All I can tell you is don't copy the U.S. system, because it's not working well. But find a way through this for copyright, privacy, and patents that enables the creation of new businesses here in Europe that have a global footprint. That's the task. If you don't, somebody in the U.S. will, or more likely, somebody in Asia will. So I would emphasize education and the regulatory environment together. You can do these. These are things you understand well. You just have to get it right. You also need to make sure that you've got more early stage funding and venture capital. The early stage funding and venture capital in Europe is about a third of that of the U.S. It's much harder. When I talk to my friends who are entrepreneurs here, it's harder for them to get early stage money. It's also more likely that they sell out to large multinationals, which we're happy to buy them, by the way, rather than hold their companies and grow them into these mega corporations, which I think you should have. There are incentive reasons why they do that. So in our case, what we want to do is support them. We're investing in, I think people know there's a TechSETI initiative, which George Osborne and I are pushing very hard in East London, which we're very excited about, post-Olympics. We're a participant in the Tech City, of course, where there's a French equivalent called the Startup Cafe and Incubators. And we're in fact doing startup weekends. We're doing this around more than 60 European cities over the next year. So we're putting our money where we mouth is, because we benefit from a creative and dynamic set of entrepreneurs, many of whom will be using our services. I understand how this stuff started. Google started as two guys in a garage, literally in a small house in Palo Alto. I know what it looks like. You can do this. So to finish up, there's sort of a tone here. And the tone, it's just pessimistic. You know, it's sort of this European winter gloom, if I could put a name on it. And I don't think it serves you well. I think it's better to take the position that Europe invented most of these ideas, so thank you very much. Most of the science, most of the physics, most of the mathematics, most of the culture, and most of the legal system was invented by you all. So why don't you take advantage of that, and why don't you fine-tune in the ways that I've described the systems? and you take a long view of history, the dream of European integration, plus the kinds of things that you can do now, if you organized yourselves to do this, you could significantly change the future of Europe by virtue of a focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, making sure it's possible to get these businesses created, getting everything interconnected, and using all of that, using that huge opportunity to solve the very real structural problems that we were all talking about. So instead of complaining all the time, which all of us like to do, and I certainly like to do, instead, let's spend our time solving the problem in a permanent way, in a way that the next generation, our children, want us to. And in the same way that our parents created it for us. I think it's right before us. If we do, I think that not only will Europe thrive, but I think the whole world will thrive. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, for a very thoughtful reflection about innovation and Europe's role in it. And thank you also for instilling in us a sense of optimism. We need that, and it's very, very comforting coming from someone like you. Now, I couldn't think of a better person to ask the first question than the European Innovation Commissioner, Mayor Gagan Quinn. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, can you come to the front, please? The Commissioner does not sit in the back. So, okay, this is faster. There you go.
Yes, nice. And by the way, can I say thank you for inviting me?
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Yeah.
It certainly was a thought-provoking talk. I visited Google in Dublin some time ago, and probably of all the visits that I've undertaken in a long political career, I visited a company where everybody was happy to be at work, and I wished I was working there myself. We don't have cafe culture in the Commission.
Look, you can do this. You're in charge. Just free food. Let people bring their free food. And by the way, make sure people can bring their pets to work. It really improves morale, especially dogs.
Pets at work, yes.
We love dogs.
Two things. First of all, I listened very carefully to what you were saying. If companies want to do business, we have to push the obstacles out of the way. And Innovation Union, our flagship initiative, was all about doing that.
Yes, absolutely. This is your agenda.
All of the different areas. And we've made some great strides in patents and in standardization, speeding up standardization and so on. But we have a long way to go. And we have to, as you said, do that with the support of 27 member states. It's not always that easy. It's a big challenge. But we have to rise to that challenge. So, two questions. Public sector innovation is something that has been raised elsewhere here during the convention today and during probably the last 18 months as we developed our innovation policy. So, how do you deliver public sector innovation? Where do you start? And how do you go about it? That's the first question. And the second question...
Let me just talk about that, because I think, again, you are much more of an expert than I, so I think this is an appropriate discussion for the whole group. Public sector innovation is very different from what I'm speaking about, because ultimately I think that the number one priority should be to get the forces of the private sector globalized, because that will create huge wealth, huge secondary effects. The public sector innovation will be around strategies. We want to serve our citizens better. And the simple answer there is to move to cloud computing. That the simplest way to deal with all of this is to say that government is a service, that everybody will have some kind of a web presence and some kind of government online presence, that everyone will be connected, right? So that's an important strategic agenda, which means you have to worry about rural connectivity and all the things that are part of, and I know in Ireland, because I met with the President and all of that, we talked about this at some length, these are important agendas. But ultimately, I think it's around turning the model around. If you use cloud computing to talk to your citizens, you can measure it, you can ask them if they're happy, you can serve them, you can find out if they like the driver's license bureau or not, if they like the way the registration groups or not. and so forth? Are the paychecks and the Social Security benefits being delivered on time? And I think that inversion causes the innovation that you're describing. Because now all of a sudden you've got a platform to ask questions. Are the people happy? Would they like another service? Rather than building some monolithic service and then another monolithic service and another monolithic service, which is very expensive and often fails.
Okay, and my second question is a very different one. As a significant investor in Europe,
yes,
when you sit around the boardroom in Google and you look at the world and you decide where to invest, what's uppermost in your mind and what makes you decide to invest in a particular area?
Well, Google is an unusual company in that our growth has been true globally, even through this very difficult recession, because we're riding the conversion from non-internet to internet, and we're one of the leading brands there. So our story may be unique to us or a small handful, but we basically invest everywhere. And the decision to invest from a sales perspective is directly related to the revenue growth and growth rates. So today our fastest investment is in Asia and Latin America because they're growing quite a bit faster than the United States and Europe. Europe, for at least Northern Europe and the US, are largely mature in the sense that they're growing at a slower rate, but still growing. With respect to engineering, we invest based on where the talent is. European universities are phenomenal. There's an enormous number of people who actually like Europe, and they live in Europe, and they're Europeans. And we want to keep them here, and we want them to work for Google. We have thousands of engineers working in Europe, in Zurich, and in 5 or 6 other main headquarters, as well as a number of smaller sites. As you know, in Ireland, we made a decision to put our service, essentially European and global service there, for many reasons, including favorable tax treatment. And the quality of the workforce that's coming out is just amazing. So again, our model proves that Europeans will work incredibly well under the model that I'm describing for other countries. We have it as a fact that it works. It's just a matter of getting the incentives right, getting the cultural aspects right. That's why I'm so optimistic. And I do, by the way, believe that, using Ireland as an example, Ireland, and you're well familiar with the tremendous debt issues that Ireland has, I do believe that Ireland as a case study is a good example of how the internet really has given an opportunity for some global businesses. When I was there in July, I met with them. And these guys have exports now all over the world. It's true.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I see that Don Tapscott was trying to get my attention. Don, if I may introduce you. You really need no introduction.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, Don, are you speaking after me? Tomorrow.
He's speaking tomorrow.
Okay, so you get. I don't get the word after your speech. Don, does everybody know who Don is? Don is probably the most famous author and studier of the crowdsourcing community networking aspects of. Is largely the author of the wiki terms, would be my description of Don. Go ahead, Don.
Thank you, Eric. You're too kind. I wonder what we can learn about the Google culture in terms of innovation, because Google is such an innovation engine. And sort of from the outside, it's non-intuitive. Looks a little weird, actually. I mean, you enter into businesses where there's no obvious revenue model. You give stuff away. You have what many would think is a strange view of intellectual property and of patents, that these should support innovation rather than just protect companies. You compete with yourself, but you partner with competitors. You have this thing about not doing evil, and you kill initiatives because you think they might be bad. I mean, lots of companies think evil is good as long as it makes money. You tell employees to waste their time, 20% of the week, not to work on traditional things. You have this strange management approach where people are sort of treated like peers and where you don't mind failure. This makes no sense whatsoever. Could you just say a few things about the culture of Google that might be helpful for the people?
What I would tell you is it works for us. It works just fine for us. Now, Google, I think the culture starts with our 2 founders who largely wanted to have it feel like graduate school. One of the first acts I had to do when I came in as CEO is edict a rule that you could not live at the office. You could not actually sleep there. You know, you actually had to have a bed somewhere else. We had other rules. You had to wear clothes, you know, these sorts of things. So I think philosophically, it's organized around the individual and their ideas. And Google can be understood as an innovation engine from the bottom, with the management trying to sort of sort out which the opportunities are. So there's lots of new ideas that are coming from people because we ask them to work on things. We have 20% time, so we ask people to develop new ideas. And then the leadership team, the management team, has the difficult job of deciding what's good and what's bad. One of the things that's happened, I was CEO for 10 years, Larry is now CEO, and Larry has been going through, in the last 6 months, going through the many, many projects which I started or we started, which hadn't really sort of taken off, and he's killing them, because then it creates an opportunity for something else. And it's better for us to do that ourselves because they're not working. So I think the combination works well. I would tell you that the Google model will work just fine in Europe because of the quality and the intellect of the people, as long as you make one change. And that change is that you have to change the relationship of the boss and the subordinates. The European corporate model is very hierarchical. You have management boards, everyone runs around, you know, I'm in charge, that kind of thing. That doesn't work with highly creative people who can move quickly. And that's the big change. And I hope that the new companies that the innovation agenda will do can actually do that.
Thank you, Eric. I actually think, unfortunately, we are out of time because I know you are on a very, very tight schedule. But let me just say that you were absolutely right to call this evening for what you described as data-driven decision-making. I think that this has all given us something to think about because in many ways we are data-rich but information-poor. And your company and you personally have, of course, done so much to bring better information to us as users, as consumers. And I think we all want to thank you for that. And in general, thank you for taking the time to address the Innovation Convention. I know how valuable your time is, how busy you are. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you very, very much. No, thank you. That was very nice of you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, thank you, guys.
Now, before you all leave, let me make 3 quick announcements and really one very quick request. On the announcements, for anyone here who took a headset, please return them. These are very expensive devices, and they are not to be taken back to the hotel or home. So please return them. Secondly, tomorrow morning, please stay with me. There is a breakfast on gender, science, and innovation. It takes place at 8:30 in the morning. This is an invitation to everyone, and we look forward to seeing many men there, because this issue of gender, science, and innovation is as much a male issue as it is a female issue. Thirdly, please allow me to do some advertising for the Lisbon Council. We're doing a fringe session tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock on micro-multinationals. Our keynote speaker is Don Tapscott. So if you want a preview of Don, please come and join us tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock at the Lisbon Council fringe session. Finally, and at the very end of this exciting day, I wanted to thank actually Commissioner Gagan Quinn, because she is for me the quintessential personification of a doer, of someone who does innovation, and unfortunately she left. But that is no reason not to thank her. And in addition to that, I also want to thank her amazing team. I'm doing this today because I'm not speaking tomorrow, so I will take the opportunity to just mention, please thank Marion Dewar, Charlotte Andersdottir, Charlotte Guggenheim, Nathalie Perrault, and Claire Lombard. I cannot tell you how much work they have put into this. And I know there were many others, but I don't know your names, so please give a warm round of applause to them. They've done an amazing, amazing job. So, all there's for me to do is to wish you a nice evening. Enjoy the networking event. Please meet each other. You're an amazing audience, and thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.